The Vampire King opened the wrong door while his secretary was changing. What he saw changed everything. The storm rattled the ancient windows of Thornwood Manor with unusual violence that October evening. Lord Casimir Thornwood, Vampire King of the Northern Territories for 3 centuries, strode through the marble corridors of his estate with his characteristic grace, blonde hair catching the candlelight like spun gold. His pale fingers clutched a leather folio containing reports that required his secretary's immediate attention. "Miss Holloway must review these before the council meeting," he muttered, his crystalline blue eyes scanning the documents as he walked. The blood treaty negotiations with the Eastern Covens were delicate, and Ivana Holloway had proven herself invaluable in such matters over the past 2 years. She was remarkable, really. Unlike the trembling humans who typically lasted mere weeks in his employ, Ivana possessed an unusual composure around the undead. Her sharp mind and sharper tongue had earned his respect, a rare commodity for any mortal. She anticipated his needs, managed his affairs with ruthless efficiency, and never once asked about the locked rooms or the visitors who arrived only after midnight. Casimir approached the East Wing, where he'd arranged private quarters for his secretary. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors, and he'd been distracted, reviewing Clause 17 of the treaty while walking. He reached what he believed was his study door and pushed it open without knocking. The sight before him froze even his ancient blood. Ivana stood with her back to him, dressed only in a silk chemise that ended mid-thigh. But it wasn't her state of undress that arrested his attention. It was the massive tattoo that covered her entire back, from shoulders to the base of her spine. The design was unmistakable to anyone versed in vampire history. Intricate old script wound around the image of a crown pierced by 7 daggers, with blood-red roses blooming where each blade penetrated. At the center, a name written in the ancient language of the first vampires, Adrian Valmont. Casimir's mind reeled. That name was death itself. That symbol was forbidden. Ivana spun around, her hazel eyes widening in shock. "Lord Thornwood." For a moment, neither moved. Then Casimir stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him with deliberate calm that betrayed nothing of the chaos in his thoughts. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Holloway. I mistook your chambers for my study." His voice remained level, but his eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, fixed on her with an intensity that made her pull a robe around herself with trembling hands. "However, now that I'm here, perhaps you'd care to explain why you bear the mark of the Valmont massacre on your skin." The colour drained from Ivana's face. It's just a design. I liked the aesthetic." "Do not insult my intelligence." Casimir's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. He moved with supernatural speed, suddenly standing mere inches from her, though he made no move to touch her. "That is the exact mark worn by the Bloodsworn, the personal guard of Adrian Valmont, the vampire queen who was executed 150 years ago for crimes against both our kind and yours. Those who bore her mark were hunted down and destroyed. Every single one." Ivana's breathing quickened, but she lifted her chin with defiance that surprised him. "Then perhaps your hunters weren't as thorough as you believed." "Are you confessing to being over 150 years old, Miss Holloway? Because you bleed. I've smelled it often enough. You are human." "I am," she said quietly, "but that doesn't mean I don't carry her legacy." Casimir studied her face, noting details he'd somehow missed in 2 years of daily interaction. The unusual flecks of amber in her hazel eyes, the way she never flinched at his presence when every human instinct should scream danger, the peculiar ring she always wore on her right hand, silver, which most humans in vampire employ avoided. "Tell me everything," he commanded, though his tone had shifted from threatening to something else. "Curiosity, perhaps. Now, or I will summon the council and you will tell them instead. I assure you I am the more merciful audience." Ivana moved to the window, her silhouette framed by lightning. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of long-buried secrets. "My great-great-grandmother was Clara Holloway, lady-in-waiting to Queen Adrian. She was human, but she loved the Queen like a sister. When your kind betrayed Adrian, when they dragged her to face judgment for daring to protect humans from vampire predation, Clara tried to save her. She failed." Casimir's jaw tightened. He knew this history, but the official version was different. Adrian Valmont had been painted as a traitor who'd broken ancient laws, who'd threatened the very foundation of vampire society. Her execution had been deemed necessary. Before Adrian died, Ivana continued, she entrusted Clara with something: documents, evidence, proof that her execution was orchestrated by members of the High Council who wanted to expand their territories and continue treating humans as mere livestock. Adrian had been working to establish new laws, protections. They killed her for it and erased her true legacy, replacing it with lies. These are dangerous accusations, Miss Holloway. And yet you haven't stopped me from speaking them. Ivana turned to face him, because part of you wonders if they're true, part of you has always questioned the official story. She was right, damn her. Casimir had been young when Adrian was executed, barely a century old, but he remembered the whispers, the inconsistencies in the trial records. He'd buried those doubts as he rose through vampire society, eventually claiming his own territory and title. Even if what you say has merit, what do you expect to accomplish? Revenge, justice. She's been dust for a century and a half. The vampires who orchestrated her murder are not, Ivana said sharply. 3 of them sit on your current council: Lord Thornwood, Mordecai Crane, Delphine Ashworth, Victor Reinhardt. My family has tracked them for generations, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Casimir's expression darkened. And I suppose I'm meant to be your instrument of vengeance. How disappointing. I thought your competence was genuine, but you've simply been manipulating your way close to power. My competence is genuine, she shot back. Do you think I'd have survived 2 years in this position if I were merely some revenge-obsessed fool? I took this position to access records, yes, to confirm what my family always believed, but I stayed because— she hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her features. Because you're nothing like them. You treat humans with dignity. Your territory has the lowest mortality rate of any vampire-controlled region. You enforce laws protecting my kind. You're the vampire Lord Adrian hoped would exist when she fought for reform. The compliment caught Casimir off guard. He moved to her desk where papers lay scattered, his own correspondence he noted, along with what appeared to be personal journals. Show me your evidence, he said finally. All of it. If you're asking me to believe that 3 council members conspired to execute a queen and have hidden this for over a century, I'll need more than family stories and a tattoo. Ivana's eyes widened. You're willing to look. I'm willing to hear you out, nothing more. He met her gaze. But understand this, Miss Holloway, if you're lying, if this is some elaborate scheme, there will be consequences. And if you're telling the truth— he paused, the implication staggering— then we're both in more danger than you can possibly imagine. She nodded slowly, then knelt beside her bed and pulled out a locked chest. From around her neck she withdrew a key and opened it. Inside were bundles of letters, photographs, official documents with wax seals still intact, and a leather journal embossed with the Valmont crest. This is Adrian's personal diary from her final year, Ivana said, handling the journal with reverent care. Clara smuggled it out the night of the execution, and these— she indicated a stack of correspondence— are letters between Crane, Ashworth and Reinhardt discussing their plans. They were arrogant enough to document everything, never imagining a human servant would dare steal from them. Casimir took the journal, his fingers tracing the familiar crest. He'd seen it only in history books, always accompanied by words like traitor and radical. He opened to a random page and began to read. Mordecai came to me again today with threats disguised as concern. He says my proposed reforms will destabilize our society, will make us weak before our enemies. But I see the truth in his eyes. He fears losing the power that comes from treating humans as property. He and his allies profit from the blood trade, from the terror. They don't want equality. They want dominion. I told him I would not back down. The laws will pass at the next council. We will become better than we are, or I will die trying. Clara worries I'm being too bold. Sweet Clara, always trying to protect me, but some things are worth the risk. Casimir's hand trembled slightly, the first physical sign of emotion he'd shown. He looked up at Ivana, who watched him with barely contained breath. There's more, she said quietly. Much more. Financial records showing how they profited from reversing Adrian's reforms after her death. Testimonies from vampires who were there, who knew the truth but were too afraid to speak. My family has spent 5 generations collecting this evidence, Lord Thornwood. waiting for the right ally. And you believe I'm that ally? I believe you're the only vampire lord powerful enough to challenge the council who might actually care about the truth. Your reputation suggests a male of honor, however rare that might be among your kind. Her voice softened. And I've worked beside you for 2 years. I've seen how you treat those weaker than yourself, how you've stayed your hand when others would have killed. You're different from them, Lord Casimir. You have to be, or there's no hope for any of us, human or vampire. The use of his given name, spoken with such faith, struck something deep within him. How long had it been since anyone believed him capable of honor? Centuries of political maneuvering and necessary cruelties had built walls around whatever nobility he'd once possessed. If I pursue this, he said slowly, it will mean war. The council will not simply accept accusations against 3 of its senior members. Even with evidence, there will be those who prefer comfortable lies to difficult truths. I know. You could die, quite horribly. The protections I've afforded you as my secretary will evaporate the moment we move against them. I know, she repeated, but her voice didn't waver. Then tell me, Miss Holloway, Ivana, why sacrifice everything for a vampire queen who died before you were born? Why risk yourself for a conflict that isn't yours? Ivana was quiet for a long moment, her fingers unconsciously touching the ring she always wore. Because Clara loved Adrian and Adrian tried to save people like me. Because every generation of my family has carried this burden and I won't be the one to abandon it. And because, she looked directly at him unflinching, because I've read enough history to know that evil succeeds when good people, good beings do nothing. You taught me that yourself, actually. It's a quote you keep on your desk. The measure of civilization is how the strong treat the weak. Casimir recognized his own words, though he hadn't realized she'd paid such attention. He looked down at the journal again, at the letters, at the evidence of a conspiracy that had shaped vampire society for a century and a half. Every practical instinct told him to walk away, to dismiss this human woman and her dangerous crusade, to maintain his position, his safety, his comfortable existence. But as he met Ivana's eyes, so full of determination and desperate hope, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: purpose. Real purpose, not merely the maintenance of power and territory. We'll need to be extraordinarily careful, he said finally, and watched hope bloom across her features. If we alert them to our suspicions before we have irrefutable proof and allies in place, they'll destroy us both and bury this evidence for another century. We'll need to verify these documents, find vampires who might corroborate the story, build an unassailable case. Then you'll help me, Ivana's voice cracked slightly. Truly. I'll pursue the truth, he corrected. Where it leads, we'll see, but Ivana, you must promise me something in return. Anything. No more secrets between us. If you're asking me to risk everything I've built, I need to know there are no other surprises waiting, no other family legacies or hidden agendas. Can you give me that? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, so brief a human would have missed it, but his vampire senses caught it. Something else remained unsaid, but before he could press her, she nodded. No more secrets, you have my word. It was a lie, or at least not the complete truth. Casimir knew it with certainty, but as lightning illuminated the room once more and thunder shook the windows, he decided to let it pass. For now, they had larger concerns, and whatever else Ivana Holloway was hiding, he sensed it wasn't a threat to him. Not yet, anyway. Then we begin tomorrow, he said, gathering the letters carefully. I'll need to examine all of this in detail. In the meantime, I suggest you invest in a lock for your door, Miss Holloway. We can't have any more accidental intrusions. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Of course, Lord Thornwood. He moved toward the door, then paused. That tattoo, is it permanent? Yes, I got it on my 18th birthday. It's my oath, marked in ink and skin. I'll see Adrian Valmont's name cleared or die trying. Casimir nodded slowly. Admirable, foolish but admirable. He opened the door, then glanced back one final time. For what it's worth, Miss Holloway, Adrian would likely have appreciated your loyalty. That kind of devotion is rare. So is a vampire king willing to challenge his own kind for justice, she replied quietly. Perhaps we're both rarities, Lord Thornwood. As Casimir made his way back through the corridors to his actual study, the leather folio full of evidence tucked under his arm. He couldn't shake the feeling that his entire existence had just shifted on its axis. He'd opened the wrong door and seen a tattoo. Such a simple thing, such a catastrophic revelation. By dawn, he'd read every document 3 times over. And by the time the sun set the following evening, Lord Casimir Thornwood had made a decision that would either redeem a murdered queen's legacy or destroy everything he'd spent 3 centuries building. Possibly both. 3 weeks had passed since Casimir discovered Ivana's secret, and the dynamic between them had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Where once their interactions had been professionally cordial, now they worked in weighted silence, surrounded by 150-year-old secrets spread across his private studies table. This financial ledger places Mordecai Crane at the scene of the blood trade expansion just 6 days after Adrian's execution, Ivana said, pointing to an entry in faded ink. He purchased 3 livestock facilities, their revolting term for human captives, in territories Adrian had just liberated. The timing can't be coincidental. Casimir leaned over her shoulder, close enough that her warmth registered against his perpetually cool skin. He'd become acutely aware of such details lately, the subtle lavender scent she wore, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the graceful efficiency of her movements. Dangerous observations for a vampire lord to make about his human secretary. The timing is damning but circumstantial, he said, forcing his focus back to the ledger. We need something that directly links him to orchestrating the execution itself. Crane is clever enough to claim he simply took advantage of a political opportunity. What about this? Ivana pulled out a letter, its wax seal broken but still bearing Delphine Ashworth's family crest. She writes to Victor Reinhardt about finalizing their plans for the council vote and mentions ensuring the Valmont problem is permanently resolved before she corrupts more of the young ones with her radical ideas. Better, but still not explicit enough. They'll argue it refers to a political vote, not assassination. Casimir straightened, rubbing his temples in a gesture of frustration he'd adopted from too many years among humans. These bastards were careful. They documented enough to coordinate with each other, but not enough to explicitly incriminate themselves. Then we find someone who was there, someone who'll testify to what really happened. Anyone who would testify is either dead or too terrified to speak. Believe me, I've been considering our options. He moved to the window, watching the moon rise over his estate. We need leverage, something so compelling that silence becomes more dangerous than speaking. Ivana stood, joining him at the window. In the candlelight, he could see the determination etched in her features, and the exhaustion. She'd been pushing herself relentlessly, barely sleeping, sustained by purpose and what he suspected was an unhealthy amount of coffee. There is someone, she said quietly. Someone my grandmother mentioned in her journals, a vampire named Sebastian Locke. He was reportedly one of Adrian's supporters on the council, but he vanished shortly after her execution. The official record says he died in a territorial dispute, but my grandmother didn't believe it. She thought he went into hiding. Casimir's head snapped toward her. Sebastian Locke is alive. You know him? Know of him, he was legendary. One of the oldest vampires in existence, nearly 600 years old. If he survived and could be convinced to testify. Casimir's mind raced with possibilities. A vampire of that age and reputation could corroborate the conspiracy in ways no document can. But Ivana, if he's been hiding for 150 years, he won't reveal himself easily. And I have no idea where to even begin looking. I might. Ivana returned to the table and pulled out a slim volume he hadn't noticed before, a journal with different handwriting than the others. This belonged to my grandmother, Elena. She became obsessed with finding Locke, believed he was the key to everything. Her last entry, written 3 days before she died, mentions a location, the old lighthouse on Raven's Point, where the sea keeps its secrets. She was planning to go there but died of pneumonia before she could make the journey. Casimir took the journal, reading the entry himself. Raven's Point was 3 days' travel north, a desolate stretch of coastline in territory nominally controlled by the Eastern Covens, but largely abandoned, perfect for a vampire seeking to disappear. It's a slim lead, he said. After 150 years, the chances of him still being there are slim, yes, but they're not zero, and what else do we have? Ivana's voice carried a desperate edge. We've been analysing these documents for weeks, and we're no closer to having enough evidence to move against them. If Sebastian Locke exists and remembers what really happened, he could change everything. She wasn't wrong. Casimir set the journal down carefully. I'll go alone, it's too dangerous. Absolutely not. Ivana crossed her arms. I'm coming with you. Don't be absurd. This isn't a negotiation, Miss Holloway. If Locke is there and he's hostile, I can defend myself. You're human, you're fragile. One wrong encounter and I'm the one carrying 5 generations of my family's research in my head. I'm the one who can speak to Adrian's legacy in ways you can't. I'm the one with Clara's final letter to Locke. Yes, there's a letter. Did you really think I'd shown you everything? She pulled an envelope from inside her jacket. Clara wrote to him after Adrian's death, begging him to stay alive to preserve the truth. If he's there and he's been hiding all this time, this letter might be the only thing that convinces him to emerge. Casimir stared at the envelope, then at Ivana's defiant expression. You said no more secrets. I said no more secrets that threaten you. This doesn't. It helps us. She held the letter protectively against her chest. And before you pull rank or try to compel me to hand it over and stay behind, remember that I've been voluntarily drinking small amounts of vervain for the past year. Low enough not to harm me, but enough to resist vampire compulsion. Another family tradition. Despite himself, Casimir laughed, a genuine sound of surprised admiration. You've been poisoning yourself as a precaution. The world is full of vampires, Lord Thornwood. A woman learns to take precautions. Her expression softened slightly. But I'm trusting you with this information. I'm trusting you with everything. Please extend me the same courtesy. Let me come with you to find Locke. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to lock her in the manor if necessary and make this journey alone. But as he looked at her, this remarkable, infuriating, courageous human who'd spent her entire life preparing for this crusade, he realized something troubling. He trusted her. More than that, he'd come to value her presence in ways that had nothing to do with her secretarial skills. 3 days there, potentially days searching, 3 days back, he calculated aloud. We'll need a cover story for your absence, and you'll follow my instructions without question when we're in the field. Agreed. Ivana's face lit up with victory. Agreed. Then we leave tomorrow night, pack light and practical, and Ivana, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to that tone of command that had made lesser beings tremble for centuries. Vervain resistance isn't absolute. Don't mistake a precaution for invincibility. In the field, away from the protections of this manor, you'll be vulnerable in ways you haven't experienced. Stay close to me. Trust me to keep you safe. Something flickered in her eyes, not fear but awareness. Of the danger, yes, but also of the intimacy inherent in his words. I will. They departed the following evening in Casimir's unmarked carriage, travelling under the pretence of inspecting his northern border territories. The first 2 days passed uneventfully, with Ivana reviewing documents during the day while Casimir rested, and Casimir driving them through the nights while Ivana slept, or tried to. On the 3rd evening, as they approached Raven's Point, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. Rocky cliffs plunged into churning seas, and the skeletal remains of the old lighthouse emerged from the mist like a grim sentinel. Cheerful place, Ivana muttered, pulling her coat tighter against the salt-laced wind. Perfect for hiding. Casimir brought the carriage to a stop and helped her down. His hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, a detail they both noticed and neither acknowledged. The lighthouse keeper's cottage should be just beyond that ridge. If Locke is here, that's where we'll find him. They made their way carefully across the rocky terrain, Casimir's supernatural vision guiding them through the darkness. The cottage appeared abandoned, its windows dark, door hanging loose on rusted hinges. Too abandoned, Casimir realized, too perfectly staged. Wait, he began, but a voice cut through the darkness. I wondered when someone would finally come. A figure materialized from the shadows, tall, gaunt, with silver hair and eyes that had seen centuries pass. Sebastian Locke unmistakably, though worn by years of isolation. Lord Thornwood, Locke said, his voice carrying recognition. I've followed your career with interest, and you, young lady, have the look of Clara Holloway about you, the eyes particularly. Ivana stepped forward, pulling out the letter with trembling hands. My name is Ivana Holloway. Clara was my great-great-grandmother. She wanted you to have this. Locke took the letter with surprising gentleness, breaking the seal that had remained intact for over a century. He read in silence while Casimir and Ivana waited, the crash of waves below filling the tense quiet. When Locke finally looked up, his eyes glistened with something that might have been tears. She forgave me for running, for not standing beside Adrian when it mattered. She understood you were trying to survive, Ivana said softly. But we need you to do more than survive now, Lord Locke. We need you to testify, to tell the truth about what happened to Queen Adrian. You're asking me to sign my own death warrant. I'm asking you to finish what Adrian started, Casimir interjected. Mordecai Crane, Delphine Ashworth and Victor Reinhardt still sit on the council. They still profit from the systems Adrian tried to dismantle. They murdered a queen and rewrote history to paint themselves as heroes. How much longer will you let them win? Locke's expression hardened. Careful, young lord, you're barely 3 centuries old. You have no idea what you're asking me to risk. Then enlighten me. Tell me why justice for Adrian Valmont matters less than your comfortable hiding place. For a moment, Casimir thought the elder vampire might attack him, but instead Locke laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You want the truth, the real truth, he gestured toward the cottage. Come inside. If I'm going to condemn myself, I might as well do it properly. The interior of the cottage was surprisingly well maintained, lined with books and maps. Locke poured himself a glass of what Casimir recognized as high-quality blood wine and settled into a chair that had clearly been his refuge for decades. I was there the night they decided to kill her, Locke began. Crane, Ashworth, Reinhardt and 2 others who have since died. They invited me to join their conspiracy, believed I'd be sympathetic since I'd opposed some of Adrian's reforms on procedural grounds. But there's a vast difference between political disagreement and assassination. Why didn't you warn her? Ivana asked, pain in her voice. I tried, God help me, I tried. I sent word through Clara actually, but Adrian, he smiled sadly. She was too brave for her own good. She believed the council would never dare move against her openly, that the other vampire lords would intervene. She underestimated how many of them wanted her silenced. Tell us everything, Casimir said. Every detail. We have documentation, but we need testimony. We need someone who was in the room where it happened. Over the next hours, Sebastian Locke laid out the conspiracy in meticulous detail. How Crane had organized secret meetings. How Ashworth had manipulated council procedures to ensure sympathetic members would oversee the trial. How Reinhardt had personally led the execution squad and destroyed Adrian's body so thoroughly that not even her ashes remained. Ivana recorded everything in shorthand, her hand flying across pages while tears streaked her face. This was what her family had sought for 5 generations, undeniable truth from an unimpeachable source. There's one more thing, Locke said as dawn approached. Adrian had a contingency plan. She knew they might kill her, so she hid something. The original Charter of Vampire Governance, signed by the First Council nearly 1,000 years ago. It explicitly forbids the blood trade, requires consent for transformation, and mandates protections for humans in vampire territories. Every law Adrian proposed was actually just enforcing the original charter that centuries of corrupt councils had ignored. Casimir leaned forward. If that document exists, it proves that Crane, Ashworth and Reinhardt aren't just murderers. They're violators of the most sacred laws of our kind. The entire vampire world would have to acknowledge Adrian was right. Locke stood, moving to a loose stone in the fireplace. He pulled out a metal cylinder, tarnished with age. She gave this to me the night before her arrest. I was supposed to reveal it if she died, but I was too afraid. I've carried that shame for 150 years. He handed the cylinder to Casimir, who opened it with reverent care. Inside was a scroll, its parchment ancient but remarkably preserved. The text was in old script but perfectly legible. And there at the bottom were the signatures and seals of the First Council, vampires so ancient they'd passed into legend. This changes everything, Casimir breathed. It means we can win, Ivana said, her voice trembling with emotion and exhaustion. We can actually win. It means we have a chance, Casimir corrected, though hope flickered in his chest for the first time. Sebastian, will you stand with us? Will you testify before the council? The old vampire was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he looked at Clara's letter again, at the forgiveness written in faded ink, and straightened his shoulders. Adrian deserved better than my cowardice. If this is my chance to finally give her justice. He met Casimir's eyes. Yes, I'll testify, though we'd better have a damned good plan, because the moment they realize what we're doing, all hell will break loose. Then it's fortunate, Casimir said with a dangerous smile, that I've spent 3 centuries learning how to navigate hell. As the sun rose over Raven's Point, 3 conspirators, a vampire king, a human secretary, and a ghost from the past, began planning the trial that would shake the foundations of vampire society. In her cottage grave 150 years cold, perhaps Adrian Valmont's spirit finally rested easier. The game had changed, and this time the truth had champions willing to fight for it. The Grand Council chamber hadn't been this full in half a century. Vampire lords and ladies from every territory packed the ancient hall, their ageless faces illuminated by candlelight that cast dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed a millennium of vampire politics. Word had spread that Lord Casimir Thornwood had called for an emergency session and would be making accusations of historical significance. No one knew exactly what that meant, but the tension was delicious. Casimir stood at the center of the chamber floor, immaculately dressed in black and silver, his blonde hair pulled back to reveal the sharp angles of his face. To his right, in a section reserved for witnesses and experts, sat Ivana Holloway, the first human to ever be permitted in these chambers during an official session. The exception had caused quite a stir, but Casimir had invoked an ancient rule allowing necessary witnesses regardless of species. To his left, hidden behind a privacy screen per his own request, sat Sebastian Locke. Only Casimir, Ivana, and 3 trusted allies knew of his presence. The revelation of a vampire believed dead for 150 years would be their final, devastating blow. But first they had to survive the opening moves. "This is highly irregular, Lord Thornwood," Mordecai Crane said from his council seat, his dark eyes glittering with suspicion. He was a thick-built vampire with a cruel mouth, dressed in crimson that matched his reputation for brutality. "You've called us here under emergency protocols, but refused to state your purpose until all are assembled. Some might call that theatrical." "I call it necessary," Casimir replied calmly. "What I'm about to reveal concerns the entire vampire world. It seemed appropriate that the entire council bear witness." Delphine Ashworth leaned forward, her porcelain features arranged in concern that didn't reach her cold grey eyes. "You're frightening us, darling. Has something happened? Are we under threat?" "That depends," Casimir said, "on your definition of threat. But let's not waste time with pleasantries. I'm here to discuss the trial and execution of Queen Adrian Valmont, which occurred 152 years ago." The chamber erupted. Voices rose in confusion, surprise, and from Crane, Ashworth, and Reinhardt, carefully controlled alarm. "Ancient history," Victor Reinhardt snapped. He was lean and wolfish with silver hair despite being younger than Casimir. "The Valmont matter was settled long ago. She broke fundamental laws and paid the price. Why are we revisiting this?" "Because the official record is a lie," Casimir said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Adrian Valmont was not a traitor. She was murdered by members of this very council to prevent her reforms from dismantling the blood trade and other profitable violations of our most sacred laws." Silence fell like a blade. "That is a serious accusation," Crane said, his voice dangerously soft. "I hope you have extraordinary evidence, Lord Thornwood, because what you're suggesting borders on treason." "Oh, I have evidence." Casimir gestured to Ivana, who stood and began distributing copies of documents they'd spent weeks preparing. Financial records showing that Mordecai Crane, Delphine Ashworth, and Victor Reinhardt all profited enormously from reversing Adrian's reforms immediately following her death. Correspondence between the 3 of them discussing, resolving the Valmont problem. Testimony from families of vampires who disappeared after expressing support for Adrian's policies. The council members read in stunned silence. Some faces showed shock, others calculation. Crane, Ashworth, and Reinhardt maintained expressions of dignified outrage. "Forgeries," Crane declared, "clearly fabricated by someone with a grudge against The documents have been verified by 3 independent historians, including Lady Morgana of the Eastern Covens, who I believe has no particular fondness for me, and therefore no reason to lie on my behalf, Casimir interrupted. Her report is included in your packets. Lady Morgana, a severe vampire with iron-grey hair, nodded from her seat. The documents are authentic. I'd stake my reputation on it. The question is what they actually prove. They prove a pattern, Casimir said, a conspiracy of profit and murder, but you're right, by themselves they're not conclusive, which is why I've brought additional evidence. He held up the metal cylinder. This contains the original charter of the First Council, signed by the founders of vampire civilization nearly 1,000 years ago. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The first charter was legend, believed lost or destroyed centuries ago. Impossible, Ashworth breathed. The charter was lost in the Great Fire of... It was hidden, Casimir corrected, carefully removing the scroll. By Adrienne Valmont, who discovered that everything she proposed, consent for transformation, protection of humans, abolition of the blood trade, was already law. The original law established by our founders and ignored by generations of corrupt councils. He held the scroll up, and even from a distance the seals were recognizable. Ancient vampire houses, some extinct, some still powerful, the founding mothers and fathers of their entire civilization. Let me read you Section 7, Casimir said, his voice ringing through the chamber. No vampire shall trade in human lives, nor keep them as chattel, nor transform them without freely given consent. Those who violate these laws violate the fundamental compact of our society and shall face dissolution. Does that sound familiar? Because it's exactly what Adrienne Valmont was trying to enforce when she was executed for threatening vampire society. The chamber exploded into arguments. Vampires shouted at each other at the council at Casimir. Some demanded to examine the charter. Others insisted it was a fake. Crane, Ashworth and Reinhardt remained silent, their expressions carved from stone. Even if that document is real, Reinhardt finally said, his voice barely controlled, it doesn't prove we had anything to do with Adrienne's death. The council voted. The decision was made by majority. We simply carried out the will of manipulated vampires who didn't know the full truth, Casimir cut in. But you 3 knew. You knew Adrienne was right and you killed her anyway because her righteousness threatened your profits. And I can prove it. He turned to the privacy screen. I'd like to call my final witness, a vampire who was present during the conspiracy, who heard the plans firsthand, and who has lived with the guilt of his silence for 152 years. Lord Sebastian Locke, please step forward. The screen was removed, and Sebastian Locke stood, his silver hair and ancient eyes unmistakable to the older council members. The reaction was immediate and visceral, shock, disbelief, and from Crane, Ashworth and Reinhardt pure terror. Impossible, Crane whispered. You died, we confirmed. You confirmed what you wanted to believe, Locke said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I went into hiding because I was a coward who valued survival over justice. But I was there, Mordecai. I was in the room when you, Delphine, and Victor planned Adrienne's murder, when you discussed how to manipulate the trial, how to destroy her support, how to profit from her death. I heard everything. He's lying, Ashworth said desperately. He's been in hiding for over a century. Clearly his mind has been affected. You can't trust. I can corroborate every detail in those documents, Locke continued louder now. I can describe meetings that were never officially recorded. I can tell you exactly how Victor personally led the execution squad and destroyed Adrienne's body so thoroughly that not even DNA remained. I can tell you how Delphine forged council minutes to make the vote appear more unanimous than it was. I can tell you how Mordecai threatened, bribed, and blackmailed other council members into compliance. He stepped down from the witness area, facing the 3 accused vampires directly. I can tell you how Adrienne begged for a fair trial, how she presented the charter you're now claiming doesn't exist, and how you 3 laughed while she burned. I was too afraid to stop you then, but I'm not afraid anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. These are wild accusations from a discredited hermit, Crane tried, but his voice lacked conviction. They're the truth, said a new voice. An elderly vampire Casimir recognized as Lord Thaddeus, one of the council's most respected members, stood slowly. I was young then, and I voted to convict Adrian because I was told she threatened our survival. But I always wondered. Things moved so quickly. The evidence seemed almost too perfect. If what Lord Locke says is true, if that charter is genuine, then we've built 152 years of law on a foundation of murder and lies. We need a formal investigation, another council member declared. We need a trial, someone else shouted. The chamber descended into chaos again, but this time the tide had turned. Vampires who'd been uncertain were now outraged. Those who'd been sympathetic to Crane, Ashworth, and Reinhardt were distancing themselves. The weight of evidence, testimony, and that damning charter was too much to ignore. Casimir caught Ivana's eye across the chamber. She was pale, trembling, but her expression was triumphant. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. Enough. The voice belonged to Queen Katerina of the Western Territories, the single most powerful vampire in the chamber besides the accused. She rarely attended council meetings, which made her presence now all the more significant. I invoke the right of blood justice. These accusations are too serious to be dismissed and too well evidenced to be ignored. Mordecai Crane, Delphine Ashworth, Victor Reinhardt, you will face formal trial for the murder of Queen Adrienne Valmont and conspiracy against the First Charter. Until that trial concludes, you are stripped of your council positions and confined to your territories under guard. You can't, Crane began, but Katerina's eyes flashed red. I can and I am. Does anyone challenge my right? No one did. Queen Katerina's bloodline was ancient enough and her power absolute enough that even the accused knew better than to fight her directly. Lord Thornwood, Katerina said, turning to Casimir, you and your witnesses will remain under royal protection until the trial. I suspect there will be attempts to silence you. Understood, Your Majesty. As guards moved to escort Crane, Ashworth, and Reinhardt from the chamber, Mordecai turned to Casimir with pure hatred burning in his eyes. You've signed your death warrant, boy, he hissed. You and that human pet of yours, we have allies you can't imagine. This isn't over. You're right, Casimir said calmly. It's not over, but it's the beginning of the end for vampires like you. Adrian's vision will finally be realized, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. 3 months later, after a trial that captivated the entire vampire world, Mordecai Crane, Delphine Ashworth, and Victor Reinhardt were found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and violating the First Charter. Their execution was carried out at dawn, their ashes scattered to the winds. The council formally exonerated Adrienne Valmont and established new laws based on the First Charter, laws that would transform vampire society for generations to come. In the aftermath, Casimir found Ivana in the manor's garden, standing before a new monument he'd commissioned. It was a statue of Adrienne Valmont, carved from white marble, with an inscription taken from her diary. We will become better than we are or die trying. She would have liked this, Ivana said softly as Casimir joined her. Your family earned this victory, 5 generations of dedication and sacrifice. No, Ivana corrected, turning to face him. We earned it. You risked everything, Casimir. Your position, your safety, your life. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He reached out, gently taking her hand, a gesture that had become increasingly common between them over the past months. You showed me that some things are worth the risk, that honor isn't just a word in old books, that even a vampire can choose to be better than his nature suggests. Ivana smiled, squeezing his fingers, and you showed me that not all vampires are monsters, that some are capable of extraordinary courage and compassion. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The tattoo on Ivana's back had been joined by a new one, a small crown over her heart, visible only to those she chose to show, a private memorial to a queen finally vindicated. What happens now? Ivana asked. The trial is over, justice is done. Do I go back to being your secretary? Do we go back to pretending we are just employer and employee? Casimir turned to her, his ancient blue eyes soft with something that might have been love, if vampires still remembered how to name such feelings. I don't think we can pretend that anymore. I don't think I want to. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Stay with me, Ivana, not as my secretary but as my partner. Help me build the world Adrian envisioned. We've started something that will take decades to fully realize. I want you beside me for all of it. I'm human, she reminded him gently. I have decades at best, you have eternity. Then we'll make the most of your decades, and when the time comes, he hesitated, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. If you wanted it, I could offer you more time. I would never force transformation on you, never violate your consent, but the option exists if you wanted to continue this work beyond a human lifespan. Ivana studied his face, seeing the hope and fear mingled there. The vampire king who'd learned to fight for justice was now asking for something infinitely more personal and terrifying. A future together. Ask me again in 10 years, she said finally, a smile playing at her lips. Let's see how you feel about me after a decade of partnership. I'm told I can be quite difficult. Casimir laughed, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. My dear Ivana, I've known you were difficult since the day I opened the wrong door. That's never been a deterrent. No more secrets, she asked, echoing the promise they'd made months ago. No more secrets, he confirmed. We face everything together from now on. As night fell over Thornwood Manor, the vampire king and the human woman who changed his world stood together beneath the stars, guardians of a hard-won truth and architects of a better future. Somewhere in the darkness, perhaps the spirit of Adrienne Valmont smiled. Her legacy was finally secure, and love, that rarest of treasures in the immortal world, had bloomed in the most unexpected of places, between a king who'd learned to care and a woman brave enough to teach him. The story that began with a wrong door and a forbidden tattoo had become something neither could have predicted. A love story written in justice, sealed in courage, and destined to echo through the ages. Want more stories of forbidden love, dangerous secrets, and unexpected redemption? Join my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Exclusive and uncensored episodes are available only on Patreon. Check the link in the description.